Hello, everyone. This is MeasureCast, the data-driven way of digital marketing show. This is now our fourth episode, and you can watch or listen to all the past episodes on our YouTube channel called Measure School. Now, today's topic is going to be a deep dive into the top features of GA4. Now, we realize Google's announcement of phasing out universal analytics has brought about a few negative vibes in the community. So we want to step back and go a little bit on the positive side. We want to talk a little bit about more why we should be excited for GA4 and what are some of the things that you should be looking forward to. If you are a measurement geek like I am and want to chat about GA4, please stick around because we'll be answering as many questions as we can in the second half of the show. My name is David, and with me today is the founder of Measure School, Julian.
Hey, everyone. Thanks
Hey,
for
Julian.
having me again.
How you're doing well today, as you already said?
Yes, everything fine here. Looking forward to the weekend, but also studying up on GA4, obviously, and going through our list here. I'm excited about GA4 as it's an opportunity for everybody, I think, in the field of analytics, and it's new technology. I love playing around with new technology, so that's always cool.
Yeah, I think the thing that excites me the most is just knowing that every week or two something new comes out about GA4, which shows Google's commitment to making this, world class. I mean, I realize it might not quite be there yet, but certainly is on their screen as probably one of their top priorities, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. Didn't make the list, but just the update frequency of the features, the update frequency in GA4 is insane. And there's always something new to talk about. New bugs being introduced, but also killed. And then we see some other things pop up and new things to get used to, so it doesn't get boring.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I think it's also kind of neat in the community itself, how many people are able to come out with, updates and different tutorials and stuff that are like brand new that people haven't seen yet because of all those new features coming out. That's pretty neat just to, go through YouTube and see some of that stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have quite a few questions to go through. If you don't mind, let's move on into the questions.
All right, let's go.
All right, great. The first question we had is obviously privacy is a huge deal in the EU, and it's really starting to come around elsewhere, like in the United States. Can you explain to our listeners how privacy is better in GA4 than it was in Universal Analytics?
Sure. So privacy is a huge topic, especially when we look at Google Analytics. There were some recent court rulings here in the EU saying that Google Analytics would be illegal. And there was a special version installed of Google Analytics, which was Universal Analytics without anonymization of IP and so on. And this really is the crux of it. Universal Analytics was always built on a system that then got another feature because privacy laws changed and so on. Now with GA4, privacy is built, at least to a certain extent, into by default, because we can have granular controls per country what we want to turn on and off, especially when it comes to features like Google Signals. We can turn it on or off. We can, we are not, or Google Analytics 4 is not tracking any IP addresses by default, and makes sure that it gives us tools like the consent mode if we want to utilize that together with a cookie banner, for example, together to give us some more granular control. And therefore, it is a tool that is definitely better suited than what we had previously with Universal Analytics. So I think privacy is quite the thing in GA4.
It is quite the thing. I'm just curious, do you feel like privacy was the main reason that GA4 came out, or?
I guess it's not the main reason, because the bigger reasons are obviously they want to bring out a good tool, but it has probably upped the timeline that they had in terms of releases and what they are looking in terms of depreciation also of Universal Analytics. So shutting down analytics. You need to imagine that in Universal Analytics, there might be a lot of cross data that is maybe a vector for attack upon Google, because they're still saving that data in terms of the privacy legislation. And if you have that vector of attack, you might want to get rid of it. And that's what they announced and said, okay, we're going to shut down Universal Analytics. And actually, we are going to shut down the interface as well, which will mean your data will be gone. You will not be able to access this anymore. And that might also mean that they will just delete it at some point. And in this new version of GA4, we have, for example, a setting where Google is by default only saving data for 2 months, aggregated data longer, and you can up it to 14 months, but then the raw data will be deleted. You have the power now to export it also to something like BigQuery in order to save your data. But that lies in your hands and not in the hands of that giant corporation anymore.
That's good. It gives everybody a fresh start. So that's really good. Julian, can you explain a little bit about enhanced measurement in GA4 versus UA?
Sure. Enhanced measurement is a feature inside of GA4 that allows you to measure certain interactions on the page by default. So if you imagine Universal Analytics always was when you installed the tracking code, by default, if you didn't do anything else, it sent over page views. And from these page views, a lot of data was derived, session metrics and user metrics and so on. A lot of data already, but when it came to the interactions that you can nowadays do in certain websites, you always had to build in certain tracking codes onto your website to build this in by default. With GA4, you can enable enhanced measurement, which are events like a file download, a YouTube play, or a scroll of 90% of the website. And that can be sent over to GA4 as an event, because everything is an event in GA4. And therefore, you have automatically more data, even if you just utilize the default snippet and don't do anything else. You just need to toggle that option. So in kind of a way, you get more data by default.
That makes it certainly easier on everyone, right? Just to have that sort of ready and easy to go versus the way it was before.
Yeah, I would say that it makes it easier for people who want to have a base installation. The base installation is really much better now. But if it comes to real customization, real event tracking, real custom events that you would send in, it actually gets a little bit more complex. And that's not a bad thing per se, because you need to put a little bit more thought into your implementation rather than just pressing some buttons and suddenly you have too much data in the system. So on the one hand, I'm not always a fan of default tracking or tracking more data just because you want to have that data in there. Not all of these events are actually something that are super useful, like the scroll 90%. You need to be aware of the fact of the 90%, but it definitely makes stuff easier when it comes to getting a base installation up and running that actually gives you at least the data that a normal analyst could use already to make a few analysis and generate insights.
Okay, great. Debug View is like a real-time report that Google Analytics 4 provides, where you isolate events, parameters, and user properties. Can you tell me a little bit more about debug mode and maybe why GA4 in debug mode is better than what people were doing in Universal Analytics?
Right. So in Universal Analytics, when we were super happy when the real-time reporting came out, because Google Analytics by default takes a bit of time for the data to get processed, takes 30 minutes before they show up in your report, up to 48 hours actually. And then you would see your data. So if you send anything in, you wouldn't even know if it's been received by the tool. Then the real-time reporting came out, and you could kind of hack it together so you can identify yourself inside of this real-time report and find out what is going on in the real-time report. Now with the debug view, this is kind of a separate section inside of GA4 that lets you see only yourself and the event stream that is coming in, as well as the parameters. Every parameter will be displayed there as well, which makes it so much easier to now see our data in real time on the platform and not have to dig around the real-time reporting, which still exists. It is a bit different now, but it still exists. And the debug view is just, as an implementation, somebody who does a lot of implementations, it's just a godsend, because we were always so dependent on different extensions that we had to install, or our experience of what can work, what cannot work, and why it wouldn't work. But now we have the confirmation on the other side that data is coming in, and then you can control if it's coming in the right format.
Okay, well, that explains that quite well. Maybe you could talk a little bit about goals and how they are different in UA than they are maybe in GA conversions.
Right. Yeah, conversions is a really cool thing that they have also upgraded, kind of. Not from a perspective of, I mean, a conversion in the end is just a, yeah, I would say the first thing, I love that they kind of in the interface now have the ability to mark an event as conversion, because that's what it actually is. A conversion is not something that you send into the system, except of e-commerce conversions. It's not something that you send into the system, I want to track conversions. It's actually something that is already there. You just take the interaction and say, this for me is a conversion, because it's different for everybody else. And conversions are different to goals specifically, because goals in Google Analytics were based on many different categories, and then they have just streamlined this whole process of saying, how do you actually set this up? The other cool part is that you only had, I think 10 or 20 conversions, your goals available in Universal Analytics. And if you didn't want to use one anymore, you would need to rename it, or you would need to turn it off for the time being. In Google Analytics 4, we are able to actually swap them out. We can create as many as we want, and then we can turn them on and make them into conversions and count them this way. So you have just more flexibility. The whole conversion framework is also just from a lingual perspective of marketing speech. I want to track conversions. These are my important goals on the platform. It makes it easier to put into the system. So I think that they also became a pretty good upgrade as somebody who sets up Google Analytics 4 for the first time.
Yeah, I agree. And you can basically use different parameters to be able to set this up and be able to track this stuff a little bit easier, and also find it in your reports and be able to pull it out for people a lot easier as well.
Yeah.
Julian, how do you think audiences in GA4 are different than what we had in UA segments?
Yeah, so audience is also another great feature. I think of audiences, first of all, as a group of people. Now, in Universal Analytics, we had segments, right? You looked through your report and said, I want to isolate one part of my analysis here. And so I'm going to set up a custom segment. So everybody who has bought a previous product from me, for example. In GA4, we can now build audiences. And audiences are membership groups. They are a little bit different than what we had inside of Universal, because audiences can actually be something that somebody joins. So if somebody says they fit that segment, or that audience that you have just built in GA4, they can join after the fact and will be added to that audience. And you can be very flexible with this. For example, everybody who came to my website, stayed 5 minutes, then put this thing in the cart and bought at the end. This is my audience that I want to define. And you can add users after the fact, after you have created this, to the pool of users in that audience. And then you can actually fire an event. This happens automatically with Google Analytics 4. You can do that in the interface. You can say, please fire this event if the user has joined this audience. And you can actually turn it into a conversion as well. So you can have very flexible conversions. Again, to the last point of conversions, can be very flexible in terms of how you create conversions and make it into something that that is just so much more powerful than universal analytics. Obviously, audiences hopefully will be brought over to many different parts of GA4. You can already export them, obviously, to Google Ads, so you can retarget those people or target these people. And really, this new concept of the membership group is something that's quite powerful with GA4.
I think that, with audiences in GA4, one of the things that I've noticed that you can also use a little bit better in GA4 versus, UA before is just the timing, right? Like identifying users who have done specific actions within a certain time frame. How would you kind of set that up, or what is the thought process behind that timing?
Yeah, timing is also completely different in Google Analytics 4. Google Analytics 4 has a new way to measure time because it's also sending over hits events over with timing information and pings, so to say, Google the servers. What we can do previously in Universal Analytics was, the way that it actually worked is that you had a page view and then you had another page view and the time was measured in between. That's how you got time on site. And later Google took that data together and you can say how long was he on the site as a whole, and this average. It was never really that valid because also was the tab in the foreground and so on. So there was a lot of things about timing that was off in Universal Analytics. With GA4, we can think about timing differently because of the new concepts that are introduced, and with that come new metrics like engagement time, for example. And you can actually build now segments or audiences based on time as well. So people who were on blog pages for 5 minutes, or people who scrolled down the page and were on the page for 5 minutes without using Google Tag Manager to actually creating this kind of thing. Or what is the time between steps of a funnel? That is all something that Google Analytics 4 can now pull into reports, and that was not really as easily possible in Universal Analytics.
That's a great segue. That leads us straight into the exploration reports. In Universal Analytics, we kind of had several canned reports. Can you explain a little bit further on why GA4 exploration is so much better?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that we still have canned reports inside of GA4. We are still able to build these kind of standard reports. And exploration is definitely something for somebody who wants to explore the data further and do further analysis. So what we can do inside of Google Analytics 4 is build some really cool reporting that is not possible outside of the in the standard reports. For example, funnel analysis is a really, really big one. You can define as many funnels as you want with as many steps as you want, and run your funnels over time. And also the visualizations are quite different from what we had previously in the way that Google Universal was doing it. And we can pull up very unique reports, such as I already mentioned, a funnel report. You can have an anomaly detection in there. There's a setting for this one. You are able to pivot your data and do pathing. Pathing is also a very cool feature that was never really that useful in Universal Analytics, but with the exploration reports can be quite cool to use and really explore your data even further. So you have these two reporting modules inside of GA4, and the Explorer reports are definitely a standout feature that has been improved above Universal Analytics.
Yeah, definitely. I'm pretty excited about the reporting side of it. I think like when thinking about agencies and dealing with multiple clients, it's going to be much easier to be able to develop those reports and get that over to them so that they can see what's going on. So that's a pretty exciting thing for me. Um, let's talk a little bit about predictive metrics. I know it hasn't fully rolled out yet in GA4, but there's a few ways we can use predictive audiences, machine learning right now in GA4 that really wasn't around in UA.
Yeah, and that just comes down to what Google can now do with the data, and that's the future, obviously. Working with machine learning, working with models to help you make decisions, and even stuff that you wouldn't be able to do on the fly in just with your data in an Excel or so. So you can utilize the machine learning algorithms of Google. Now, they are not open source, and we cannot look into them, how they actually work. But Google is now able to take our data, at least as long as we give them enough data, and help them help to build actually some audiences. And these are not audiences we create, but you have these predictive audiences. And predictive audiences can be anything from most likely to be converting. And you have a few parameters that you can change around there and say, okay, I want to make my prediction 80% sure, 90% sure, and so on. And you can build these audiences, and then these audiences you can utilize, obviously, inside of Google Ads again to retarget. So if your budget goes down and you want to spend less money, you might want to adjust these parameters and say, I want to really make sure that these people convert. So 99% sure that these people convert, please retarget these people, for example, or widen the audience, obviously. So it's really cool to see because, yeah, how does a normal marketer utilize anything machine learning nowadays in their work? We can't really do this without being a data scientist and building these models ourselves. But with GA4, we get the ability at least to utilize those on these different feature sets that they have around predictive metrics, but then also predictive audiences.
I think that's going to just be more work for us. We got to learn a lot more about machine learning and a bunch of other things that are happening with GA4, which is what makes it fun and exciting every day, right?
Right.
I know we've talked a lot about the new data model, but is there anything else that you want to talk about? Maybe the benefits of the new data modeling versus data in universal analytics.
Right. So data model is probably the biggest change that we have seen. How the big how was always how can Google Analytics now measure app plus web, right? The app side of things, the new mobile world, and also website screens in that sense. And they made it possible with this new data model. This new data model is not something that they necessarily came up with, but it makes it so much more flexible and takes Google Analytics into this new era. And it's all based around events. So you are able to send over an event, for example, a page view could also be an event, but also stuff like started a project, for example. And then you have these descriptors of that you can put into parameters. And that lets you slice and dice your data later on. And these can be really powerful because you can now take a website that is maybe not an e-commerce website or a blog and really utilize this to customize Google Analytics to the business that you're working with, right? So if I would be working with a SaaS business, I would go ahead and build something around opened up an account, started a new project, invited his colleagues or whatever. And that might be much more meaningful data than it was previously in Universal Analytics itself. So that said, the data model is definitely the biggest change that we have seen, the most flexible change, but also needs a lot of thought and understanding and knowledge to operate it correctly. So that's something, if you have a learning list, experimenting more with the data model is a big thing in Google Analytics 4, because you don't want to send in redundant data into the whole measurement platform of Google Analytics. You want to keep it as fine as possible.
Yeah, so that's going to obviously require quite a bit of teaching and training and learning about the new data model, so that you can definitely do that. One of the other things that a lot of people have talked about in our community has been BigQuery integration. In Universal Analytics, you could only use BigQuery if you had a 360 enterprise account. Jillian, can you give me a couple reasons why having BigQuery implementation in GA4 is a good idea, and why it's like so much better than what you could do in Universal Analytics?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. Well, Universal Analytics, if you are not 360, as you already said, if you're not 360 member or user, then you wouldn't be able to export your raw data. Now, raw data is sometimes really useful when you are doing analysis on a particular data set, and you don't want to rely on the data that's already in Google Analytics, because Google Analytics is processing their data to a certain degree. So they might be filtering out data, they might be combining data sets. So sampling is a really big issue when you work with Universal Analytics, but also with GA4. And sometimes you just want to have the data in one place, so you can analyze it on your own terms. And on a smaller basis, you can think of BigQuery as a spreadsheet application, but just on steroids and much more powerful. It's a database system, it's a data warehouse system where you can store petabytes of data and analyze them in with SQL, flavor of SQL, so a querying language to basically model your data however you want. And just think of like Google Analytics is not just a tool that your data flows into and it shows you the data. It actually does a lot in the background, and it makes a lot of decisions about your data. Now, if you don't want Google Analytics to take a certain decision, you're kind of out of luck and can't really do anything about it, except of now you can take your data and actually build your own model around it, because you have access to the raw data, and you can build your own data model, for example, in BigQuery, and can even combine data from other sources. Just makes it so much more flexible when you then also combine it with Google Data Studio, because Google Data Studio is much more performant with BigQuery than with some of the connectors itself when they're pulling data from Google Analytics 4. So it's really great to see that they made that available to everyone. Obviously, BigQuery can cost money, especially if you put in more and more data. Yeah, it depends on how much data you have stored there and how the operations that you run on that data. But the opportunity is there, and that's why a lot of people are really excited. And some people don't even use the Google Analytics 4 interface anymore. They don't need to, because they have access to the raw data. They could build their view, so to say, in Google Data Studio or in any other platforms. You could also use a Tableau or an Excel to connect to BigQuery and get the right data if you have the right query available. So Google gave us the ability to utilize our data ourselves and take control, really, of our own data set.
All righty. Well, that completes our top 10. Let me just run through them real quick in case someone came on late. Our 10 ways GA4 is better is privacy, enhanced measurement, debug view, defining conversions, audiences, timings, exploration reports, predictive audiences, the data model, and BigQuery integration. And so those are our top 10 reasons that you should be looking at using or starting GA4. And now we're gonna get to the questions here in just a second. But first, we want to have a little bit from our sponsor.
All right. Our sponsor today is MeasureMaster. So if you are into learning measurement from the ground up or are very advanced already, we have courses for you inside of our MeasureMaster membership, videos, courses, but nowadays also a lot more interaction in our community. as well as little masterminds that we run, ask us sessions, and live trainings we have for you. We also do tools where we come up with little templates that we use in our agency and help people out to do their work just a little bit faster. So if you want to check that out, head over to measureschool.com/measuremasters and join us. It's fun over there, I'd say.
Yeah, we have a lot of fun. The community is just, it's incredible, right? Like if you put a question into our community, you'll generally get 3 or 4 answers from not only our specialists, but also other people that have been working with us for years. And so I highly recommend you go check that out at Measure Masters. So, all right. So this is what everybody's been waiting for. We have a few questions in here. Are you ready, Julian?
Sure. Yeah, let's go.
Excellent. All right. For the first one, we have, how can we track iframe form submissions on subdomains through GA4? Whoa.
Yeah, I don't know. The problem is that you would need to have something called cross-domain tracking and access to the linker itself. And there's where you are out of luck in GA4 a little bit, because they haven't really told us yet how to, or given us the API key to, not key, but the official API to find that out. In the end, what you can always do is send your data over. I guess when it's on a subdomain, you don't really need to have cross-domain tracking. So just install it and see if it works. If an event comes in when somebody submits, then and that's something you track with Google Tag Manager, obviously. Somebody submits your form, you send over an event, and then it comes into GA4. It should be attributed to the same session as the cookie is shared between subdomains and domain. That would be my thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. What do you think about a newcomer? What do they have to worry about when switching from UA to maybe GA4?
Yeah, a newcomer. Well, are you switching over because you already know UA, or are you a newcomer to the whole analytics world? I would still look at Universal Analytics as the tool that is more consistent right now. So I would actually still train people on Universal Analytics first, so they understand like kind of how data comes in and what it does, and then later get them introduced to GA4. But in terms of what you need to get used to is obviously everything, because this is a completely new tool, right? You need to learn anything from how to send data into the system, to reading that data, to then how you can go deeper into your analysis, get to insights, and hopefully build dashboards maybe in Data Studio, or export your data later on for your use cases if you are in Google Ads also. So there's tons of things to get used to.
All right. So we're kind of we're going down into a little bit more nitty gritty on some of these questions, but this one is an interesting one. Is that, could you cover any differences between UA and GA4 in terms of Google Optimize?
Well, the only difference that I know of, I haven't played it with it too much, that you can now utilize your audiences that you build inside of GA4 inside of Google Optimize once you connect it. You can also now connect the tool so you can see your A/B testing results in GA4. But other than that, obviously the data is the data and also the interface is completely different. So yeah, there are poised to be very big differences. It would be like saying I'm sending my data over to GA4 or to Adobe Analytics. Those will also be different. But that said, I would say that GA4 is probably not yet at that point where you can see all the data that you see in Universal Analytics itself. But from a feature difference, it should be pretty similar. And the audiences are one part where you have tight integration. And the cool thing, I guess, as well, is that Optimize has this point of personalization as well. So again, audiences are not something that you set up once and it gets targeted once. But if somebody joins your membership group, you could start a personalization for that person once they become a customer, for example, and they would see something different on your website itself through Google Optimize. That's what I'm aware of, at least.
Nice. Tanner asked if you think GA4 eventually will allow tracking for AMP. I know we've talked about that a little bit. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, eventually. I mean, that's all I can say. I don't work at Google. I don't have any special insights. So I don't know why they wouldn't allow this, because it was a thing before, and now if they're looking for they're looking definitely for feature parity. They want to see that at the end of the year, no, at the end of the period now, so in 1 year's time, that GA4 is definitely better than Universal Analytics, and for some people, AMP is very important. So why wouldn't they put that in?
I totally agree. All right. So if anybody out there has any more questions that they want to go ahead and post up there, please let us know. Oh, looks like we got a couple more coming in here. Let's go ahead and pop those up for you, Julian. Are we going to be able to keep using the same dimensions?
Yeah, I mean, dimension, the question is what you mean by dimension. Obviously, if you send in a dimension, a custom dimension that you have sent in customly to Google Analytics before, then you can utilize the same dimension with the same descriptor in GA4 if that's important to you. Now, when it comes to automatic stuff that is calculated, so for example, yeah, bounce rate was always my my go-to, but bounce rate is apparently coming back, right? That is also just a dimension, and that is not available currently. We have engagement time inside of GA4. Apparently, bounce rate is coming back at some point. So there's definitely different dimensions now, so you cannot utilize all. Some of the dimensions have been depreciated because they don't make any sense anymore. Like social interactions had some dimensions that they just got rid of, and they introduced some new ones as well. So on the one hand, yes, if you have custom dimensions. On the other hand, no, if you were thinking as dimensions, these dimensions that you normally see in your reports itself.
Okay. I think that now this is like a very specific question, so I'm going to ask it in a little bit more of a generic kind of way. But is there any way to configure, or how would you configure an email marketing campaign, maybe when thinking about GA4?
I have an email marketing campaign that enter like direct traffic. Okay. Is there any way to configure it and change it to referral? Yeah, so there is a way. You would need to figure out why your form doesn't. So I guess what the user is asking here is that the user, his users get sent an email, somebody clicks on the email, and then the user comes directly. I'm not quite sure. In the end, you need to look into your tracking and see where the session breaks. Probably there's a session breakage going on. You can override anything that Google Analytics does by default. So if you see that there's somebody coming in through direct, but you know for a fact because that landing page is an email landing page, yes, then you can override this by Google Tag Manager. So you can do that. You need to use different techniques in order to do this. But the first part is always check your implementation. Do you use UTMs when you send out these emails? Do you is your session breaking at some point? So does the cookie get rewritten, or does the user get a new user ID or client ID once he goes through your website? And then you would need to fix that, because it's very important for Google Analytics and Google Analytics 4 to have a session continuity. So you want to make sure that your client ID always stays the same.
Yeah, I think one of the important things is, and that when I gave you that question, Julian, as I was trying to say, is like it's impossible for us to actually know without taking a look at what your account is and how it's set up and so forth. So we do our best to answer those questions, but when they get so into details like that, it is quite challenging. So hopefully that helps you in some way. with doing that. So we've got time here for one more. Julian, if you could just talk a little bit about app and web attribution and modeling in GA4 for Varun here.
Right. So I can't really talk to how this particularly works. In the end, attribution modeling is all about Google taking data into their system and then crunching it somehow in their modeling software. And that's what attribution modeling is all about. But I can say that what GA4 does, it has no default. Well, it has a default attribution model which is data driven, which is kind of their secret sauce. But then you can change the attribution model, and there are different attribution models available. And then Google will retroactively also recrunch your conversions and so on. So that's pretty cool to see that you can now choose your attribution model, and you're not like prisoned to just take the last click attribution model. And so that's the biggest difference in GA4, that you can now choose it. In terms of how it actually works, how attribution works is that Google gets, anytime a user comes to the website and a source is determined, and anytime there is a conversion, an attribution is kind of calculated. And depending on how you choose your attribution model, it gives credit to the sources in different ways. And that's kind of what attribution modeling is all about. I guess there's no thing that is different in theory that Google is doing. Now, there could be some factors that you factor in, like if you have user ID or Google Signals implemented, and if you have more conversion data because you're maybe sending in data that that has more touch points, so to say, then it might be different. But in the end, it's still attribution modeling. Some stuff is just going on behind the scenes in their detailing, in their modeling department, in their data crunching processing that we don't have access to and can say, like, this is exactly how it works. So when a user comes in and he does this and this and this, then he is attributed to your source. That's really hard to say, because we don't, we have access to the raw data now, so we could look into it. But in the end, what you would do with your raw data is probably build your own attribution model if you want to do it with one of these tools that are out there. But this would be happening outside of Google Analytics 4. So I hope that helps.
That was a great answer. Thank you very much. For everybody that's here, and we didn't get a chance to talk about what you've put in there. One of the things that Julian always does when we're done here is to goes back through the comments and has a little banter. So please hold on for 3 or 4 more minutes. But Julian, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up today. One thing I just wanted to talk about real quickly was, once again, MeasureMasters, which is your premium program. If you go to the website and look for MeasureMasters, you'll find out all the different things that are there, including our Measure Minds, which is really cool. Every week we talk about GA4 topics. There's also courses that come out every single month. So please go to measureschool.com/MeasureMasters. Take a look at that. And if you're interested in joining a community that's all about data and measurement, please come join us. We'd love to have you there, and we look forward to seeing you on the inside. And thanks a lot for showing up today. We appreciate all of the questions that everybody's answered.